The distraction was all I needed. I leveled my revolver at Caleb, but he was already charging me, wild and bleeding, a man with nothing left to lose. We hit the ground hard, rolling near the edge of the ravine. His hands went for my throat, fingers digging in, fury burning in his eyes. "You ain't taking what's mine," he roared. I clawed at his face, gasping for air. My hand found the knife at my belt. With every ounce of strength left in me, I drove it upward. Once, twice. He froze. The rage in his eyes flickered out, replaced by shock. Then, slowly, he toppled backward. I heard the sickening sound of his body hitting the rocks below before I realized I was still breathing. The world went quiet. Only the wind and the echo of the fall remained. I sat by the canyon's edge for what felt like hours, the blood on my hands already drying brown. The storm clouds had swallowed the sun, painting everything in shades of gray. I felt hollow, empty and alive all at once. Crow made his way down from the ridge, his face pale, his hat in his hands. "Is he?" started. "Gone," I said. He nodded slowly. "Guess that's justice, then." I looked at him, my hands trembling. "No, that's survival." He crouched beside me, his voice soft. "You gonna be all right?" I wanted to say yes, to tell him it was over, that I could finally breathe. But deep down, I knew something had shifted forever. Once you spill blood, even in self-defense, you never really get clean again. "I'll manage," I whispered. Crow reached into his coat and pulled out a small tin flask. "For the pain," he said, handing it to me. I took a sip, burning whiskey, sharp and bitter. It felt right. We buried what was left of Caleb Boone in the canyon that night, before the rain started. No coffin, no prayers. Just a few words neither of us meant, and a pile of stones heavy enough to keep the coyotes away. When we finished, I stood there, watching the lightning crawl across the horizon. Crow glanced at me. "What do you do now?" "Ride," I said, "far as the road takes me. Maybe find a town that don't know my name." He nodded. "And if they ask what happened?" I looked down at the fresh grave and felt the storm wind tear through my hair. "Tell them the truth," I said. "Tell them Caleb Boone got exactly what he planned for me a fall." It took me 3 days to reach the next town. By then, the rain had washed most of the blood from my coat, but not from my memory. Every shadow looked like him. Every creak of the saddle felt like a ghost whispering in my ear. I checked into a small inn under a false name. Clara James, the woman behind the counter, didn't ask questions. Folks rarely did out here. The frontier was full of people running from something. That night, I sat by the window, staring out at the open plains. Somewhere out there, beneath that broken land, lay the man who'd once sworn to love me till death did us part. He'd kept half that promise, at least. I took the telegraph device from my satchel, the one I'd taken from his coat after he fell. The screen flickered to life. There were still messages on it, most from Caleb's conspirators. But one new message blinked at the top, dated just yesterday. Unknown sender. Heard about the accident. Job done? Payment ready upon confirmation. My breath caught. It wasn't just Caleb. Someone else had wanted me dead. I stared at the message, heart pounding, then typed a single reply with trembling fingers. Job's done, but the wrong person fell. The device blinked, then went still. Outside, thunder rolled across the desert, echoing like distant hoofbeats. I leaned back in my chair, the storm reflected in my eyes. The frontier had a way of testing a woman's strength. And now, I wasn't the same woman I'd been. Maybe I was something harder, colder, something Caleb had created without meaning to. Somewhere in the darkness, a new life was waiting. And if anyone else came for me, they'd learn the same lesson he did. In the Wild West, the only kind of justice left is the sun had barely crept over the jagged line of the canyon when I woke to the sound of the wind brushing against the thin wooden walls of our cabin. The air smelled of smoke and dry sage. Mornings in Red Vulture County always carried a strange silence, like the desert was holding its breath, waiting for something awful to happen. My husband, Caleb Boone, was already gone. I could tell by the empty space beside me and the faint scent of whiskey still clinging to the sheets. He'd been leaving earlier and earlier these past few months, saying he needed to tend to horses or ride out to town to handle business. Business, I'd come to realize, was just another word for secrets. I pulled on my boots, still dusted from yesterday's work, and poured myself some black coffee from the pot on the stove. It had gone bitter overnight, but bitterness had become a familiar taste. Outside, I could see Caleb's horse gone from the pen, its tracks leading toward town. My fingers traced the rim of my cup as I tried to ignore the gnawing suspicion that had been eating at me since last week. It had started with a letter, or, more precisely, with the way Caleb hid it. He'd come home late that night, dust on his coat, a nervous twitch in his jaw. I'd been sitting by the fire, mending one of his shirts, when I saw him slip something into the pocket of his saddlebag. He thought I didn't notice, but I'd spent 6 years learning every flicker of that man's body language. The way his hand lingered just a second too long told me the truth. He was hiding something. The next morning, when he left for the stables, I went looking. The letter was there, creased, faintly smelling of tobacco. It wasn't addressed to him, but to Deputy Randall Crowe, the man who'd once courted me before I chose Caleb instead. I didn't open it at first. My hand trembled, my heart drumming in my chest like a warning. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. I read it anyway. Everything's set for the end of the month. The creek crossing looks like a fair place for an accident. Make sure she rides alone. I read that line a dozen times before my eyes could make sense of it. Make sure she rides alone. My name wasn't in the letter, but I knew that she was me. For days, I tried to convince myself it wasn't true. Maybe it was some misunderstanding, some plan gone wrong. Maybe the letter wasn't even meant for Caleb to see. But then came the whispers in town. Folks saying Caleb had been visiting the sheriff's office more often than usual, that he'd taken out a loan in his name, and mine too. Then there was his new pistol, a silver-plated Colt he claimed was for ranch protection, but I'd never seen him use it for anything but showing off. The final straw came last night. He'd been asleep by the fire, bottle still half full beside him. His coat lay on the chair, and from its pocket, something glinted, a small, brass-plated telegraph device. I'd seen them before, but not one so new. It could send and receive short coded messages over the county lines, used mostly by lawmen and smugglers. Curiosity and fear got the better of me. I turned the dial, pressed a switch, and the screen lit with faint green words burned into its surface. A list of messages, each stamped with dates. The last one made my blood run cold. See, she suspects. We stick to plan. The ravine crossing Friday night. Make it look like a fall. Friday night. That was tomorrow. I remember sinking to the floor, the room spinning. My husband, my Caleb, was planning my death down to the last detail. And not just any death. An accident. I suppose that was cleaner for a man like him. No blood on his hands. No questions from the sheriff. Just a widow buried under her own horse. A tragic tale for the town. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, gun in my lap, heart pounding every time the wind howled through the cracks of the cabin. I thought of running, of packing what little I had and heading north to Santa Fe, or maybe even California. But the moment I stepped outside, I knew I wouldn't make it far. Caleb had friends in every town between here and the mountains. Men who owed him favors. Men who would find me before I ever crossed the border. By dawn, I had made up my mind. If Caleb Boone was planning my death, I'd give him a show he wouldn't forget. When I rode into town that afternoon, the air was thick with dust and gossip. The saloon doors swung lazily in the wind, and a group of ranch hands sat outside playing cards. Their laughter died the moment they saw me. I could feel their eyes on me, measuring, whispering. I hitched my mare outside the general store and walked in, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Behind the counter, old Martha Dunn looked up from her ledger. "Well, if it ain't Mrs. Boone," she said, her smile thin as paper. "What brings you to town this early?" "Just needed some things," I said. "Rope, matches, oil." She raised an eyebrow. "You planning to start a war or a fire?" "Maybe both." I muttered under my breath. As she packed my things, I caught sight of the sheriff's office across the street. A tall shadow moved past a window. Deputy Crow. He looked older than I remembered. The last time I'd seen him, his hair had been coal black, his jaw smooth. Now he carried years of dust and regret on his face. Still, his eyes had that same steel in them. I told Martha to keep the change and cross the street before I could change my mind. Crow looked up as I entered. "Mrs. Boone," he said, standing straighter. "Haven't seen you in a long while." "I reckon you're right," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "What brings you by?" "I came across something last night. Something I think you ought to see." I took out a folded piece of paper. The telegraph message I'd copied down word for word. His eyes scanned it, then met mine. There was something there, shock, confusion, maybe guilt. It was hard to tell. "Where did you find this?" he asked slowly. "In Caleb's things." Crow swallowed. "You sure it's real? Does it look like I'd make up something like that?" He leaned back against his desk, exhaling sharply. "Damn." I told him this was a bad idea. My blood went cold. "You what?" Crow froze. The slip had escaped him before he realized what he'd said. "Listen, it ain't what you think," he started, but I was already reaching for my gun. "You're in on it," I said quietly. "You and Caleb. The letter I found, it was from you." "I wasn't going to let him go through with it," Crow said, hands raised. "He came to me months ago, said you were planning to leave him, take half the land. He thought if you died accidental-like, he could keep it. But I told him no. I swear to you, I told him no." My hand trembled, but I didn't lower the gun. "Then why send the letter?" "Because he threatened me," Crow said. "Said if I didn't help, he'd tell everyone I'd been taking bribes off the railway company. You know what that'd do to me." His words sounded desperate, but there was truth in them. Still, truth didn't matter much now. Betrayal had already taken root in my bones. I lowered the gun slightly. "Then help me, Randall. Help me end this." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but if we're doing this, we're doing it clean." By nightfall, the plan was set. Caleb would expect me to ride to the ravine tomorrow evening. The perfect spot for an accident. But what he didn't know was that Randall Crow and I would be waiting first. When I got home, Caleb was sitting on the porch, cleaning his revolver. His face broke into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Evening, darling," he said. The next morning broke red and angry. Clouds rolled in from the east, low and bruised-looking, promising a storm by sundown. The desert wind howled across the plains like a warning, whipping dust against the windows of the cabin. Caleb stood by the corral, tightening the saddle straps on his chestnut mare. He looked calm, too calm. "You sure you want to come along, darling?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. "That trail's rough. Could throw a horse if you ain't careful." I forced a laugh. "I'll be careful." He smiled thinly, and in that smile, I could see the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The man who'd saved me from a drunk rancher in a deadwood saloon, who'd whispered dreams of a homestead and family. That man was gone now, replaced by something colder, sharper. The kind of man who could plan his wife's death and sleep soundly after. I packed a small satchel, water flask, a knife, the old revolver I'd hidden in the lining of my coat. My fingers brushed against the folded paper inside my pocket. The copy of that telegraph. A reminder that I wasn't imagining any of this. A reminder of what he'd done. We rode out just after noon. The sun burned high above us, blistering the earth, and the only sounds were the creak of leather and the steady clop of hooves. Caleb whistled low, a tune I didn't recognize. He looked at ease, his hat pulled low against the glare. Every mile we rode, the silence grew heavier. At one point I dared to speak. "You've been quiet lately. Everything all right?" He tilted his head, smiling faintly. "Just thinking." "About what?" He didn't look at me when he answered. "About how easy it is for things to change. One minute, you've got everything you want. Next, it's gone." My throat went dry. "Sounds like you've been reading those dime novels again." He chuckled. "Maybe I just see the world clearer than you think." We reached the Ravens Drop Ravine by late afternoon. It was a jagged stretch of canyon about 20 miles from town, a place where the land split open into a deep scar of red stone. From the top, you could look down and see a trickle of water glinting at the bottom like a silver vein. The trail narrowed here, just wide enough for one horse at a time. A perfect place for an accident. Caleb dismounted and tied his horse to a nearby juniper tree. "Let's rest a spell," he said. "Water the horses." I nodded and led my mare to the stream. My hands shook as I untied my canteen. My heart thudded so loud I was sure he could hear it. Every sound seemed sharper. The buzz of insects, the rustle of wind to the canyon grass, the metallic click as Caleb checked his gun's chamber behind me. That was my signal. I knelt beside the stream and caught my reflection in the water. My face looked pale, almost ghostly. Maybe that was fitting. After the day, I'd either be dead or free. When I stood, I caught sight of Randall Crow's horse high up on the canyon ridge. Just a silhouette against the dying sun, barely visible. But there, he raised his rifle in silent acknowledgement. Everything was ready. Caleb's voice broke the stillness. "You ever think about what happens after?" he asked. "After what?" He smiled, holstering his revolver. "After we die, you think folks remember us? Or do we just turn to dust?" I swallowed hard. "Depends on what we've done worth remembering." He stepped closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. "Guess that's the trick, ain't it? Leaving behind the right story." I could smell his cologne, cheap whiskey, and cedar oil. His hand brushed his coat, and I saw the glint of his pistol. That was when I drew mine. "Don't," I said sharply. He froze, then laughed. "Now what's this, darling? You planning to rob me?" "Shut up," I snapped. "I found your messages, Caleb. The ones to Crow. The plans. The ravine. The accident." His smirk didn't falter, but something flickered in his eyes, surprise, then amusement. "Well, I'll be damned. You really are clever." "Why?" I demanded. My voice cracked, anger and heartbreak tangling together. "Why do it? After everything, why?" He took a slow step forward. "Because you were going to leave me. Don't deny it. You stopped looking at me the way you used to. You stopped believing in what we built. And when a man feels his life slip away, he holds on to what's his. You mean the land," I said bitterly. "The money. That's all I ever was to you." He shrugged. "You were both, darling. Love and profit. Ain't that the American way?" I wanted to shoot him then. God knows I wanted to. But something in me wanted him to say it all, to confess, to dig his own grave with his words. He sighed and rested a hand on his hip. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this. I was hoping it'd be quick. Maybe a slip off your saddle. A cracked skull on the rocks. Folks would have pitied me. Said, 'Poor Caleb Boone lost his wife to the canyon.' But you had to go snooping. Guess I learned from the best." He smirked again and drew. The gunfire split the silence like thunder. I dropped behind a boulder, hard hammering as dust exploded where I'd been standing a heartbeat before. My bullet whined past his head, chipping the rock behind him. He ducked, fired again. The shot grazed my arm, searing pain shooting through me like fire. From above, a single rifle shot rang out. Caleb's hat flew off. He staggered, clutching his shoulder. I looked up to see Crow lowering his rifle. The shot hadn't killed Caleb, just wounded him. On purpose. Caleb stumbled backward, eyes wide with shock. "You set me up," he snarled. "Consider us even," Crow called from the ridge. Caleb fired at the ridge, bullets sparking off stone. Crow ducked behind cover.